The story of David and Goliath is one of the most well-known and beloved tales in the Bible. It's a classic underdog story that has captured the imagination of people for thousands of years. But this story is about so much more than just an improbable victory. It's a powerful lesson about the importance of faith in God, even when the odds seem insurmountable. The story of David and Goliath takes place during a time of great turmoil and conflict in the nation of Israel. The Israelites were engaged in an ongoing battle with their longtime rivals, the Philistines. The two armies had gathered for war, facing each other across a valley. Leading the Philistine forces was a giant of a man named Goliath. The Bible describes him as over 9 feet tall, with bronze armor and a massive spear. Goliath was an imposing, fearsome warrior, and he knew it. Day after day, he would taunt the Israelites, challenging them to send out their best fighter to face him in single combat. But the Israelites were terrified of Goliath. They knew that no ordinary man stood a chance against this towering giant. The Israelite army was paralyzed by fear, unable to muster the courage to accept Goliath's challenge. That is, until a young shepherd boy named David arrived on the scene. David had been sent by his father, Jesse, to bring supplies to his older brothers who were serving in Saul's army. When David heard Goliath's taunts, something stirred within him. You see, David was no ordinary shepherd. He was a man after God's own heart, a man of deep faith and courage. David had already demonstrated his bravery by defending his father's flock from lions and bears. And he knew that with God on his side, he had nothing to fear. So David approached King Saul and said, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." 1 Samuel 17 verse 32. Saul was skeptical at first. "You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." 1 Samuel 17 verse 33, but David insisted, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." 1 Samuel 17 verse 37. Saul reluctantly agreed and outfitted David with his own armor. But David quickly realized that the heavy armor and sword were not suited for him. He was more comfortable with the tools of a shepherd, his sling and some smooth stones from the stream. And so, with nothing but his faith in God and his trusty sling, David approached the mocking Goliath. The giant sneered at the young shepherd boy, insulting him and boasting of his own strength and power. But David was undeterred. He declared to Goliath, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." 1 Samuel 17 verse 45. David went on to explain that the battle was the Lord's, and that Goliath would be delivered into his hands. The young shepherd boy then quickly loaded his sling, took aim, and with a single smooth stone, struck Goliath right in the forehead. The giant crashed to the ground, defeated. This victory over Goliath was not just a triumph of physical strength or military prowess. It was a profound spiritual victory, one that demonstrated the power of faith in God. You see, David knew that the battle was not his own, but the Lord's. He understood that his own abilities and resources were no match for the towering Goliath. But he also knew that with God on his side, he was unstoppable. This is a lesson that we all need to learn. So often, we try to face our giants, whether they be physical, emotional, or spiritual challenges, relying solely on our own strength and resources. But the truth is, we will always fall short on our own. It's only when we put our trust in God, when we lean on His power and wisdom, that we can truly overcome the obstacles in our lives. David's victory over Goliath reminds us that God delights in using the seemingly weak and insignificant to accomplish His great purposes. The Apostle Paul wrote, "But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong." 1 Corinthians 1 verse 27. David was just a young shepherd boy, with no military experience and no impressive physical stature. But he had faith in the Lord, and that was all he needed. God used David's simple trust to defeat the mighty Goliath, to the astonishment of all who witnessed it. This story has so many powerful lessons for our own lives. First and foremost, it teaches us the importance of faith in God, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. So often, we look at the giants in our lives, the problems, the obstacles, the fears, and we become paralyzed by them. We focus on the size and strength of our opponents, just like the Israelite army did with Goliath. And we convince ourselves that we have no chance of winning. But David's example shows us that when we put our trust in God, when we rely on His power and not our own, He can use us to accomplish incredible things. No challenge is too big for our God. No giant is too strong for Him to defeat. David's courage and faith also teach us the importance of obedience. When David's father sent him to the battlefield, he went without hesitation. He didn't make excuses or try to get out of it. He simply obeyed, trusting that God would be with him. And when it came time to face Goliath, David didn't try to fight the giant on Goliath's terms. He refused Saul's armor and weapons, and instead used the tools he was most familiar with, his sling and stones. David knew that he needed to fight the battle his way, the way God had equipped him. This is a lesson for us as well. God often calls us to do things that don't make sense from a human perspective. He may ask us to step out in faith, to take a risk, or to use our unique gifts and talents in ways that seem unconventional. But if we obey and trust Him, He will equip us and empower us to fulfill His purposes. So how can we apply the lessons of David and Goliath to our own lives? How can we overcome the giants that we face, whether they be physical, emotional, or spiritual in nature? First and foremost, we need to cultivate a deep and abiding faith in God. We need to trust that He is sovereign, that He is good, and that He is more powerful than any challenge we could ever face. When we root our identity and our hope in Him, we can face our giants with courage and confidence. We also need to be willing to step out in obedience, even when the task seems daunting. Like David, we may be called to do something that doesn't make sense from a human perspective. But if we trust in God's leading, He will give us the strength and wisdom we need to succeed. And finally, we need to be willing to use the unique gifts and talents that God has given us. We shouldn't try to fight our battles on someone else's terms. Instead, we should embrace the ways that God has equipped us and use them for His glory. The story of David and Goliath is a powerful reminder that with God, anything is possible. No giant is too big, no challenge too great, for our Almighty God. When we put our faith in Him, when we obey His leading, and when we use the unique gifts He has given us, we can overcome even the most daunting of obstacles. We can slay our giants, just as David did, and experience the triumphant victory that comes from trusting in the Lord. So let us take courage from David's example. Let us face our giants with unwavering faith, knowing that the battle belongs to the Lord. And let us step out in obedience, using the tools and talents that God has provided to accomplish His purposes in our lives. For with God, we are more than conquerors. We are victorious. And that is a truth that will never change.